Tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets across Israel to protest Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's proposed judicial overhaul. The plan includes giving Parliament control over judicial appointments. It would also grant the legislature power to overturn Supreme Court decisions. Netanyahu is still facing unresolved corruption charges. He claims he did nothing wrong, but critics say his plans for the judicial system represent a clear conflict of interest. We're lucky to bring in Martin Indyk. He is a Lowy Distinguished Fellow with the Council on Foreign Relations and twice U.S. Ambassador to Israel. He's also the author of the book, Master of the Game, a look at Henry Kissinger's Middle East diplomacy. Mr. Ambassador, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks very much, John.
So how big of a deal is this? We know about the protests. We know that people use the term civil war. In your estimation, how big of a departure is this?
It's highly unusual. There have been large-scale demonstrations in Israel before, but you have to go back decades to find some precedent for it. And this looks much more like a full-scale civil society revolt, because you've got it across all sectors, particularly the private sector, the high-tech entrepreneurs who are moving their money out of Israel, the governors of the Bank of Israel who are warning about the credit rating of Israel being affected, as well as hundreds of thousands of people in the streets demonstrating against these judicial reforms.
And the reforms themselves, can you give us a sense of, I mean, it seems like if Parliament can override the Supreme Court, is there a check then on the Prime Minister? I mean, how much of a challenge is it to those shared liberal traditions that the U.S. talks about so much when it talks about its relationship with Israel?
Right. Well, we've come to regard Israel as a thriving democracy. I often say too thriving, but it doesn't have a constitution. And it has these basic laws that are semi-constitutional. But the new judicial reforms that are being proposed would take away the ability of the Supreme Court to override any changes made by the government in those basic laws. So the government has a majority of 4 seats. It can push through this legislation, and then it can override any judgment by the Supreme Court. So it basically takes away the concept of judicial review. At the same time, the government would take for itself the right to appoint the judges. There wouldn't be any kind of confirmation process. And so they would stack the court with their own people. And that will affect the ability to protect individual rights and minority rights. So it really has a profound impact across the system when it comes to checks and balances and the independence of the judiciary in Israel's democracy.
When FDR tried to monkey with the Supreme Court, there was a bit of a big revolt in America as well. So Netanyahu's been in power before. What's he up to now? Why now? Why this timing? And was this something he had been thinking about and let's try it now?
He used to be a great defender of the independence of the judiciary. What's changed with him is that he is under prosecution at the moment for corruption and breach of trust. And so he has a personal interest in reducing the power of the Supreme Court and stacking the judges in his favour should he be convicted, and then it would go to the Supreme Court. So there's a personal dimension, so personal that the current Attorney General, who is independent, has told him he cannot have anything to do with these changes in the judicial reforms because of a conflict of interest. So there's both a desire on his part, representing the right wing, to curb the independence of the Supreme Court, which has been a long time thing, plus his own personal interest in being able to stack the court in a way that could protect him from going to prison.
Right. So much of the current government is referred to as the most right-wing in history. You know the history so well, you've lived it. Help us understand exactly what that means and give us a couple of policy ideas that we should know about when we're putting it in that category, if you agree with that categorization.
Yeah, it is a categorization that is accurate. It is the most far right-wing government in Israel. Netanyahu has been in government coalitions that he's formed over more than 10 years, in which he has always formed coalition with parties to the left of him, as well as religious parties. So it's been a kind of centre-right coalition. This time, the centre parties would not join with him, and he, therefore, because of his court problems, He therefore went to the far right and brought these far right, somewhat crazy politicians, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, together to form his majority with the religious parties. And that's never happened before. And those guys have a very clear far-right ideological agenda, which is not so much about judicial reform. That's far more his own party that's pushing that. It's about annexing the West Bank, settling the West Bank. They just announced yesterday, the cabinet, Netanyahu's cabinet announced 10,000 more settlement units, legalization of 9 illegal settlements, illegal under Israeli law. This is far more than's ever been done, even under Donald Trump.
Very quickly, it's an impossible question, but what does this mean in terms of U.S. diplomats trying to deal with Israel and U.S. national security interest?
So there are 2 elements to this for the United States. One is our shared values with Israel and President Biden's own concern about promoting democracies and opposition to illiberal democracies like Hungary. And Israel is heading down that path towards illiberal democracy. So he's expressing some careful opposition to it, calling for consensus. Now we have a full-blown crisis with the administration over this settlement activity, which is shutting down the hope of a 2-state solution. So on 2 fronts, the administration is heading for a collision course with the government of Israel.
Martin Indyk, thank you so much for being here. We
Thanks,
really
John.
appreciate it.
Good to be with you.